Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the International Center Goa for a public lecture today on before and after Operation Sindoor, India, Pakistan, and the Great Powers. And we have with us Mr. Tilak Devasher. First, a very warm applause, please. Before I quickly introduce Mr. Devasher, one little fact, and that's that Mr. Devasher was supposed to be here 2 months ago. But if you remember the week of last week of May, I think around that, you had cyclonic disturbance in Delhi as well as in Goa. Several flights were cancelled, and we had to postpone this program to another date. And earlier this week, I was sort of worried that, my God, I mean, are we going to have another terrible week of stormy weather or something? And if it happened the second time, we would get another date maybe a month later and so on. But fortunately for us, the weather has held. In fact, it has sort of improved. So here we are. Tilak Devasher retired as Special Secretary, Cabinet Secretariat, Government of India in 2014. During his professional career, he served in Jammu and Kashmir, Delhi, and overseas. He writes on security issues, especially pertaining to India's neighborhood. And you have a bunch of books here. There's one missing. We could not get hold of it. Since 2016, he has written 4 widely acclaimed books on Pakistan. Pakistan, Quoting the Abyss, 2016. Pakistan at the Helm, 2018. Pakistan, The Balochistan Conundrum, 2019. And The Pashtuns, A Contested History, 2022. Earlier this morning, we were having a chat, and I was trying to remember, because he has been here before. We're trying to recall when exactly. And then going through the list of books, I realized it was certainly 2019, because the Balochistan Conundrum was published then, and he came for the Goa Arts and Literature Festival that December. And then after that, of course, we had COVID and other things that happened in between. Mr. Devasher has also edited 3 books for the Vivekananda International Foundation: Pakistan Insights 2019, 2020, and 2021-22. He is a former member, and that's a correction from what you have on the poster, so I made sure that I was going to read the whole thing. And he told me in the morning, look, I'm a former member of the National Security Advisory Board, and that should be there as a correction. Consultant to the Vivekananda International Foundation, Emeritus Resource Faculty at Rashtriya Raksha University in Ahmedabad, and Distinguished Fellow in United Services Institution of India. Apart from his books, he writes regularly for newspapers, magazines, and think tank journals, and appears regularly on TV talk shows. Some of you might have already seen him on television. And some of you may also know that he has recently also started a podcast. And that's interesting because about 2 weeks ago, ICG started its own podcast, and it's a surprise who the first guest was. And of course, the second episode we recorded today with Tilak. Mr. Devasher is an alumnus of Mayo College, Ajmer, and St. Stephen's College, Delhi. I think some of you here are here because of, you share his college or his school. Thank you all for coming. Mr. Devasher.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Pushkar. And good evening and a big hello to everybody present. Thank you so much for coming. What I'm going to be talking about is before and after operations. Is this better? Okay, sorry. I was trying to put it behind the laptop. So what I'm going to be talking about is before and after Operation Sindoor. All of you are aware of what happened during Operation Sindoor. I will try and add my own little bit about Operation Sindoor. It was a tragic event, and all of us are aware of the tragedy that struck on 22nd April, when 25 innocent Indians and 1 Nepali citizen were killed in cold blood. The Resistance Front, which is a proxy of the Pak-based terror outfit Lashkar-e-Taiba, claimed the attack, though it tried to deny it later. Now, the important thing about this atrocity was that it seared the consciousness of India. The tourists came from all parts of the country, and the manner and nature on which the killings took place, where people were identified by religion as Hindus and asked if they could speak the kalma, and if not, they were killed in cold blood. I think that shook and horrified all over India. And the anger and the sort of frustration in the country was palpable. And I think any democratic government would have had to factor that in its reaction. There was no way that the government could not have reacted in the manner in which they did. Pakistan tried to create the impression that this was a local attack done by Kashmiris, which was an absolute travesty because no Kashmiri would target tourists because the livelihood of Kashmiris depend on tourism. So that to begin with was a wrong argument that Pakistan did. It probably was a sense of frustration of Pakistan that when they saw that since 2019, when Article 370 was rescinded, that there was peace, there was development, there was khushhali, to put it in one word, that was coming in Kashmir. And this is something that Pakistan could not accept because of the investment they had done in Kashmir right from 1947 onwards. And finally, I think the timing of the attack was significant since it coincided with the high-profile visit of the US Vice President J.D. Vance and Prime Minister Modi's trip to Saudi Arabia. Now, India had served notice to Pakistan after Uri and Balakot that terror in interstate relations will not be accepted. For a while, Pakistan accepted that line. But obviously, it forgot the lessons. And we'll come to that. So, the reaction of India had to be much more severe and to teach Pakistan a lesson not to do this in future. So, the moot question is, why did Pakistan do this? I think there are several reasons. Pakistan Army Chief Asim Munir was the DG ISI when Pulwama took place. And he's currently the Army Chief when Pahalgam has taken place. So that's a story in itself. Second, his term as Army Chief, he completes his tenure, 3-year tenure, in November this year. And he's keen to get an extension. And I think his speech in April, where he talked about the two-nation theory and he talked about, the Hindus and Muslims could not coexist, was the opening salvo of his extension campaign. In Pahalgam, he followed it up. He probably imagined that by doing something like Pahalgam, he would unite the country behind him, because right now the army had lost a lot of popularity and was on the back foot. So he thought that India would react the way it did after Uri and Balakot. The reaction could be managed. He didn't realize what would be the reaction in India to something like this. So, instead of a limited conventional Indian response, what India did was reacted within 24 hours non-kinetically. And that, I think, is the long-term impact. By holding the Indus Water Treaty in abeyance, and I will talk in some detail about the Indus Water Treaty towards the end of my talk, that is something which has rattled Pakistan possibly much more than the kinetic action, because it has long-term implications for the entire agricultural system of Pakistan as well as the livelihood of Pakistan. Now, while Pakistan has denied any involvement, what was significant was the assertion of Foreign Minister Ishaq Dar in the National Assembly that as a non-permanent member of the Security Council, Islamabad had pushed to water down the language in the US proposed statement on the Pahalgam incident. This statement had originally named and shamed the resistance front, deliberately calling it a forum formed by a local population. Pakistan rejected its classification as a terror group. Now the question was that if the forum was actually an Indian group, why is Pakistan interested in making sure that it is not named in the statement? It is not a Pakistani group, according to Ishaq Dar. Why did he then talk about Pakistan insisting that the name of this group should not be included? So that it was a dead giveaway. And then when the US subsequently in a month's time named the TRF as a terrorist organization and an alias of the Lashkar-e-Taiba, Pakistan was faced with a lot of embarrassment and it couldn't really justify why it supported the TRF in the first place. India struck 2 weeks after the Pahalgam terror attack militarily through Operation Sindoor, which, as the Prime Minister put it, was the expression of the outrage that Indians felt. The operation was not merely an apt name, but it set a new benchmark, a new normal that defined India's new counter-terrorism policy. What India did, and all of you are aware, so I won't go into too many details, struck at 9 terror facilities, including the heads of the snake, which is at Muridke and at Bahawalpur, and other terrorist camps. In response, Pakistan escalated hitting civilian and military targets. It presumed that India would not up the ante like after the Balakot strike. However, the attacks were foiled. As the NSA had mentioned while talking to IIT Madras, not a single window was damaged. India then retaliated with drone and missile strikes. Pak air defense was unable to intercept them and thus had to suffer serious damages. These included the air defense system and the Noor Khan base in Rawalpindi, Sargodha, Jacobabad, among others. F-16 and nuclear assets were located at these airfields. Once again, the Indian Armed Forces released visual evidences of the airstrikes showing extensive damage caused to the air bases. After the Pahalgam attack, there have been confessions from Pak ministers that clearly implicate Pakistan in the terror architecture it has created over the past few decades. Thus, Minister of Defence Khwaja Asif, replying to a question in an interview to Sky News on 25th April, said, and I quote, "We have been doing this dirty work, i.e. backing and funding terror groups for the United States for about 3 decades, and the West, including Britain," unquote. Then former Foreign Minister Bilawal Bhutto, again in a conversation with Sky News on 1st May, acknowledged the country's links with terror operatives, saying that Pakistan has a past. I've already mentioned the statement of the Foreign Minister in the National Assembly. And some of you would have seen visuals of senior Pak officers taking part in the funeral of a known terrorist and Pak soldiers carrying his coffin that was draped with the Pakistan flag. The prayers were led by Hafiz Abdul Rauf, a designated global terrorist by the United States. And 2 weeks before the Pahalgam attack, very interestingly, a US-based space tech company that deals with satellite imagery had a series of requests for imagery of Pahalgam and no prizes for guessing that the request came from Pakistan. It was a Pakistan-based geospatial company, Business Systems International Private Limited, that had made these requests to a US company for satellite imagery of Pahalgam. This once again proves Pakistan's involvement in the massacre. Now then, you all know that under the Air Force's firepower and targeting, the Pak DGMO called up his counterpart on 10th of May asking for a stoppage of hostilities, and which was agreed to. An understanding was reached to discuss the modalities of the ceasefire on 12th of May. It's important to note that the understanding reached on 10th May was not a ceasefire, but just a cessation of hostilities. Now we come to the contentious issues which are on everybody's mind. Many have asked, why did India agree to an understanding to stop hostilities when it had the upper hand? I think this is a question that has exercised a lot of people. I think the reason was that India's action on 7th May, or during this entire 87 hours engagement, was against the terror infrastructure of Pakistan. India struck deep inside Pakistan, including Pakistan Punjab, hitting at terror camps and headquarters. Our response thereafter was in retaliation to Pakistan escalating to hitting civilian areas and our military installations. The response was proportionate and measured, ensuring that there was no escalation. We had made it clear to the international community that India's action is only limited to hitting terror camps because of what had happened in Pahalgam. We were not launching a full-scale war in which we were going to be targeting military installations or civilian targets. Therefore, when Pakistan pleaded for a ceasefire or stoppage of hostilities, we decided to do so since our objective of hitting the terror camps had been met. On 12th May, Prime Minister Modi visited Adampur Air Force Base. His landing at the base on a C-130 Super Hercules aircraft dispelled Pakistan's claim that it had decimated the base and taken out the S-400 air defense system. You would recall visuals of Pakistan showing, Adampur has been destroyed and so have the S-400s. In a historic speech from the airbase, Prime Minister Modi made several important points. He laid down that Operation Sindoor had defined a new normal in India's national security doctrine. And three elements of it were, if there is a terrorist attack on India, it would be treated as an act of war. A fitting reply will be given and strict action will be taken at every place from where the roots of terrorism emerge. Second, India will not tolerate nuclear blackmail. India will strike precisely and decisively at the terrorist hideouts under the cover of nuclear blackmail. And third, India will not differentiate between terrorists and the government sponsoring terrorism. Now, these are very critical elements of the national security doctrine. I think it's the first time India has said so very clearly what it will do in future, and this is laid down by for all future governments. He warned that if Pakistan wants to survive, it would have to destroy its terror infrastructure. There was no other way for peace. India's stand was absolutely clear. Terror and talks cannot go hand in hand. Terror and trade cannot go together. Water and blood cannot flow together. He also made it clear that India had only paused Operation Sindoor, its counter-offensive on Pakistan's terrorist and military establishments. In the days to come, India will evaluate Pakistan's every move based on its behavior. Finally, directly addressing the global community, he said, our declared policy remains, if talks are to happen with Pakistan, they will be only on terrorism, and if talk happens with Pakistan, they will be about Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. Overall, May 7th, when India launched the stunning air offensive against Pakistan, a new regional landscape was created. The world has taken notice of the precision strikes. Military experts have termed the operation a clear-cut victory. They have cited the extent of damage that India had inflicted on the terror camps and targeting of Pakistani air bases. Over 3 months have passed since India struck terror factories. And while the fog of war still lingers, one thing is clear. Operation Sindoor was a game changer. Pakistan has been scrambling to twist the narrative, obfuscating facts, pumping out propaganda, drowning its losses in spin. But the battle damage assessments are pretty clear, and evidence speaks louder than any press release. Many, even in India, have talked about IAF losses. And a lot of people said, how many aircraft did you lose? Now let's look at this closely. Pakistan has peddled the narrative that it shot down several IAF aircraft, had captured an IAF lady pilot, and won the war. So the critical question is, does the number of aircraft shot down determine the outcome of war? In 1971, over the then East Pakistan, the Indian Air Force lost 13 aircraft to 5 of the Pakistan Air Force. That is, the IAF lost about 3 times as many aircraft to combat than the PAF. So did Pakistan win the war? Can the PAF by itself claim victory because it lost less aircraft in action? The critical thing, I think, as the Air Marshal Bharati said, what are the objectives and were the objectives met or not? Leave aside how many aircraft were lost. The case of Bangladesh is a clear-cut thing. Because for the Indian Air Force, the war didn't end once the PAF was defeated. It redoubled close ground support to the army to hasten the victory and minimize the army's casualties, whatever the risk of its own attrition. In a nutshell, the PAF is numbers obsessed and the IAF is overall outcome oriented. For the PAF and the Pakistan public opinion, all that mattered is how many aircraft they shot down. Not surprisingly, a Gallup Pakistan poll post-Operation Sindoor showed 96% Pakistanis believe they won the war. The mood is so confused that while it is their air force that the Pakistanis think won them the war, It was the army chief who got a 5th star. If anything, it was the air chief who should have become Marshal of the Air Force rather than Asim Munir becoming Field Marshal. The air chief, already on an extended tenure, got a consolation prize in the form of an indefinite in the same rank. The IAF has a doctrine of all-out strikes, willing to take some punches. If the PAF believes in risk avoidance, the IAF is a risk taker, often at the cost of frustrating its fans with early losses. The key factor were what were the nation's objectives and did the IAF enable them to be achieved. Operation Sindoor had 3 objectives: destroy the established and well-known headquarters of the Lashkar-e-Taiba at Muridke and Jaish-e-Mohammed at Bahawalpur. Second, deter and defend any counter-strike by the Pakistani forces. Third, if they persist, demonstrably deliver counter-force punishment. The IAF checked all 3 boxes. As several top leaders have said, there were some losses in the first, but the IAF was able to back up its claim with high-definition pictures and videos as evidence. In the big picture, the PAF failed to protect any of the predetermined IAF targets. Strangely, the country can lose the war, but the Pakistan Air Force would still claim victory because they shot down more aircraft. You've seen the pattern play out in 1965 and 1971 and even post-Balakot. The PAF has not produced a scrap of evidence or picture after more than 3 months to back its claims of either shooting down Indian aircraft or causing damage in airfields like Adampur. This is inexcusable even when commercial satellites are looking at everything. The fact that they have not been able to produce any evidence shows that they were totally ineffective. And as people have asked, if the Pakistan Air Force was so dominant, why did Pakistan not win the war? And why did they then appeal for a ceasefire? Thus, who shot down how many doesn't count as much as what was air power's role in the national war effort. Now let's take a look at the ceasefire. On 10th May, Pakistan DGMO reached out to his India counterpart asking for a stoppage of hostilities. No spin can cover up the reality that this was a white flag, it was a surrender. And what forced that white flag? The sheer devastation of Operation Sindoor. These were precision strikes launched from within Indian territory. Originally a response to the Pahalgam massacre, Operation Sindoor became something far more significant. It became India's new national security doctrine that sent an unambiguous message. Pakistan tried to manufacture a victory. It claimed Indian losses on 7th May and praised the prowess of its air force, powered of course by Chinese technology. Pakistan even elevated General Asim Munir to the rank of a field marshal, a symbolic gesture meant to mask the defeat. In reality, this was the first time a field marshal's baton was handed out after a military defeat. In Q&A, there's a very interesting story of how the first Field Marshal Ayub Khan picked up his baton. Moreover, if the Chinese technology was so effective, why was it nowhere to be seen on 8th and 9th of May, when India struck again, deeper, harder and more decisively? Why did the Pakistan Air Force not venture to fly its planes after the first day? Because India penetrated Pakistani airspace, bypassed sophisticated air defenses and hit strategic targets. Pakistan couldn't retaliate and couldn't even respond. The so-called superiority of the Pakistan Air Force and Chinese weapon systems exposed for what it really was, hollow. In the aftermath, Pakistan launched a 3-part information war. 1. Claiming that Kashmir had been internationalized. 2. Suggesting that the ceasefire was a result of US mediation. And 3. Arguing that the world had re-hyphenated India and Pakistan. None of this held up. External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar made it clear there was no international mediation. Our dealings with Pakistan remain strictly bilateral. That position has not changed and it won't. Rehyphenation? What does rehyphenation mean? Given the differential in size of the economies, size of population, size of technological achievements, Can India and Pakistan ever be hyphenated or re-hyphenated? Meanwhile, global focus has returned to Pakistan's long-standing terror links. I've mentioned photos and footage of Pakistani generals and senior police officers attending the funerals of LAT terrorists, some standing directly behind Hafiz Abdul Rauf, a US designated global terrorist. As for Pakistan's claim that Pahalgam was a false flag operation, just like they claimed in Pulwama in 2019, no one bought it then, no one buys it now. And their call for neutral investigation met with silence again. For decades, Pakistan played the nuclear card. Its policy was premised on the assumption that acts like cross-border terrorism would be followed by Indian restraint. Why? Because of their narrative that any retaliation risked nuclear escalation of their first use doctrine and their possession of tactical nuclear weapons. India called the bluff. That shield is gone. Operation Sindoor broke it. India showed it has the will to strike back and strike back with precision without triggering escalation. This is a new doctrine, clear, unambiguous and irreversible. If there is a terror strike on Indian soil, there will be a military response. And next time, India may not just strike terror camps, it may choose to target Pakistani intelligence or military facilities responsible for orchestrating attacks. What time?
1 or
I'll just quickly move on to the Indus Water Treaty. I think that is important. India holding the Indus Water Treaty in abeyance in response to Pakistan's role in the Pahalgam massacre has drawn attention to the treaty itself, but has also drawn the attention to the precarious water situation of Pakistan. In fact, this is Pakistan's worst nightmare. This decision was based on the assertion of PM Modi that blood and water cannot flow together at the same time, made after 2016 Pakistan-sponsored Uri attacks in which 18 soldiers were killed. Now, as you would be aware, that the 1960 Indus Water Treaty divided the 6 rivers of the Indus Basin between India and Pakistan. Of the total water in the Indus system, India got only 20%, and 80% went to Pakistan of the western rivers of the Indus, Jhelum and Chenab. Despite being the upper riparian, India treated this unfavorable treaty as the price of peace. India even paid Pakistan £62 million to help build its dams and canal systems. India chose peace over water. Prime Minister Nehru called it as a gesture of goodwill. But what did India get in return? Wars, terror attacks, cross-border firing, betrayal, and blood of its citizens. Now, what does holding of the treaty in abeyance really mean? Does it mean India could store or even divert the Indus waters? Does India have the capacity to do so? Holding the treaty in abeyance did not mean that the water was cut off, but it means that India was no longer playing by the old rules. At the moment, India has run-of-the-river hydropower projects on the western rivers that do not store massive amounts of water. They do not impede the flow of the rivers into Pakistan. The combined storage capacity of Indian projects on the western rivers is modest compared to the extensive infrastructure that India has built on the eastern rivers. Now, however, with the treaty being held in abeyance, there is a possibility that India could either modify existing infrastructure or build new storage structures or divert waters of the western rivers. It is very difficult because to build canals or to build storage dams will take years. But what India has done is 3 things immediately. 1, not sharing hydrological data of flows. Such data is critical for Pakistan to plan for irrigation, hydropower, drinking water, and flood forecasting. 2nd, not notifying Pakistan about the projects it is building on the western rivers, and neither accepting visits by Pakistani officials. And 3rd, flushing silt from reservoirs of 2 run-of-the-river hydropower projects, Baglihar and Salal, on the Chenab in J&K. One important fact that Pakistan has not been talking about is that India had been pushing for renegotiation of the Indus Water Treaty since 2023. India's contention is that the treaty should take into account the latest engineering techniques and factor in climate change, demographic changes, and the need for renewable energy. In fact, the treaty provides for negotiations of a new treaty, but Pakistan had stonewalled the matter so far. Now, however, since India has held the treaty in abeyance, Pakistan has approached India to talk about the treaty. Now, many Pakistan leaders, including Shehbaz Sharif and Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, Bilawal Bhutto, have talked about what they will do if India were to withhold Pakistan's water. But first prize goes to Army Chief Asim Munir. At a private dinner in Tampa, Florida, with 120 members of the Pakistani diaspora, he spoke from a prepared text. First, he spoke about India's decision to put the Indus Water Treaty in abeyance and to maximize its legal use of the western rivers, Indus, Jhelum and Chenab, waters that Pakistan relies on. He claimed, and I quote, "This could put 250 million people at risk of starvation," unquote. What he was implying was that India legally using its share of the western rivers, allowed by the treaty, could put 250 million people at the risk of starvation. How does this even make sense? But more important was what he said next. And I quote, "We will wait for India to build a dam, and when it does, फिर 10 missiles से फारा कर देंगे." That we will destroy that dam with 10 missiles. Then for good effect for his Pakistani and largely Punjabi crowd, he said, quote, "Indus River is not the Indians' family property. We have no shortage of missiles, alhamdulillah." This sounds better in Punjabi, but I've said it in English. This is as crazy as it gets. India is not building storage dams on the western rivers, but run-of-the-river hydroelectric projects that the treaty allows. Clearly, Munir does not know the difference between storage dams and run-of-the-river projects. The moot point is that here is an army chief threatening to bomb civilian infrastructure in a neighboring country in peacetime and making the threat from US territory. Moreover, if Pakistan were to destroy any dams, where does he think the water will flow? It will flow into Pakistan downstream. It can't flow upstream back into India. Then, of course, will Pakistan's own dams, Mangla and Tarbela, remain safe? Okay, I'll just cut this short. And yeah. Now, one of the reasons Pakistan is rattled is, as I mentioned, their own water situation. The UN estimates that water demand in Pakistan is growing at an annual rate of 10%. This demand is projected to rise from the current levels to 274 million acre feet by 2025 this year, while the total water availability is not likely to change from the current approximately 200 million acre feet. This gap of 74 million acre feet is 2/3 of the entire Indus River's current annual average flow. Where does Pakistan get another Indus River from? Because there isn't another Indus River. Now you can understand why Pakistan is so rattled. Without even holding the Indus Water Treaty in abeyance, Pakistan faces a serious deteriorating water security situation. It is running out of water. So in my first book, I have a complete section on Pakistan's water situation. And there's a lot of projects that India is making. I won't go into the details. I'll just like to conclude by saying that in reality, rivers carry more than just water. They carry history. They have shaped civilizations. They have sustained millions. Unfortunately, today, they are at the heart of a geopolitical fault line. That fault line is terrorism being incubated in Pakistan and being spread into India. Holding the treaty in abeyance sent a strong signal to Pakistan that business as usual is not possible. The message to Pakistan is that terrorism has consequences because blood and water cannot flow together. You cannot attack us and expect the water to flow freely. The Indus Water Treaty was signed in hope, but Pakistan has belied that hope. Today, India is sending a clear and calculated message. India will now fully utilize its share without waiting for Islamabad's consent. The passive policy of the past is now over. The tone has changed. India no longer sees hope as charity. If Pakistan cannot honor the treaty signed in good faith, why should India honor it? The one lesson that India has learnt is that goodwill is perceived by Pakistan as weakness. That lesson should never be forgotten. India is not walking away, but it is redefining the rules. Restore the hope, reciprocate the goodwill, or suffer the consequences. Thank you.
Okay, so typically I begin by asking a couple of questions, but I had a long session this morning. So there's one question which I am going to ask only if the audience doesn't get around to asking that question. Okay, so any questions? Please raise your hand, and somebody with a mic will get to you. And also, please state your name so that we all know who you are.
Hello. Hello. My name is Arun Naik. Thank you very much for the presentation. You have cleared so many issues, particularly blood and terror cannot go together, water and terror cannot go together. I have a simple question. Maybe I don't know whether it will be out of place to ask you. Can cricket and blood go together? Just yesterday I read on Times of India, before that I was following it, that India is going to play in an international this tournament where Pakistan also will participate. In my good old days, my mother used to tell me whenever she had a fight with a neighbor, no, don't go to. Even I did the same thing to my son when he was young. When we were fighting with the neighbor, but flimsy fights, but then I will tell, no, don't go to their house, don't play with them. Now, can we not prolong that policy and say that, no, we are not going to play wherever Pakistan plays? I don't know how relevant it is to your talk, because your talk is little above, but I am talking of ground realities.
No, it's a very, very important question, and this is again exercised many people. I'll tell you my personal view. We should not be playing cricket at all with Pakistan. I'm very clear on this at a time when, how can you normalize? People say don't bring politics into sports. Sorry, it's already there. And as you said, you can't play with the blood of your citizens. So I would be totally opposed to this. I think the government's decision is that there will be no bilateral matches, no bilateral events. But in an international event where India has certain commitments, I would still go to the extent of saying that India should concede the match. Even in an international tournament, not play with Pakistan, we'll win anyway. Even if you concede one, which means you've lost one, you pick up no points, we'll still win. But just to drive the point home, I think we should not play.
Now, when we hit a bravado, our politicians talk about taking POK, and they even say that this was an opportunity we had. Is it practically possible to kind of capture POK with so many millions of impoverished population adding to our already inflated population, and can we afford that practically? And just second question, on 10th of May, it looked like USA panicked more than Pakistan. So did we hit some sensitive targets in Pakistan where US had interests? Thank you.
About POK, you see, this was not, even if you want to, this was not the occasion. Because you have made it very clear that your strikes were only for against terrorist camps. You can't treat the whole of POK as a terrorist camp. Second, so long as the 1994 unanimous resolution of Parliament is there, that the entire princely state of Kashmir is part and parcel of India, you have to keep that as an objective, you have to keep that as a live option of your taking control of POK. When, how, whether it should be done or not, that's for the government of the day to decide. But the 1994 resolution of Parliament binds down every government. No government can back out of that commitment that you have made to Parliament and through the Parliament to the people of India. So at some stage, if the government feels strong enough. But I have always maintained, whenever I speak in various defense institutions, this question always comes up. I think we need to do a lot of more work, homework. What are the various regions of POK and Gilgit? What languages are spoken? If you ask a lot of people, even in the defense forces and in administrative agencies, nobody will, or very few can tell you where is Shina spoken, where is Brushaski spoken, where is Khavar spoken, what is the religious composition of the people. We need to do a lot more homework. And then when you are prepared, because it's taking over territory, you can't lock up the people. You have to know what's on the other side. So I think a lot of more work needs to be done. And also, you have the 1994 resolution as against this. Taking territory or changing borders in today's world, Russia is doing it against Ukraine, and you kind of difficulty for 3 years. They have been bleeding. Both sides have been bleeding. It's not easy. It's not easy. It's what the resolution is there, and that's the objective that the Parliament has set for the people and for the government. You can't get around it.
Second question, sir.
Awesome.
You guys are panicking.
Yeah. So there is a lot of talk. There's a lot of chatter. A lot of people have talked about the Noor Khan base, the Kirana Hills. That these were actually storage for the US. I can't say anything definitively. In fullness of time, you will find some article coming out of the New Yorker or something like that giving details. But it is believed that the command and control system or some such thing. I mean, there are Pakistani YouTubers who say that the entire Noor Khan base had actually been handed over to the Americans. And Americans' flight would land with equipment which the Pakistanis didn't know about. So, but this is all unconfirmed, anecdotal kind of thing. There's no surety of it.
But USA's attitude has changed towards India.
To a great extent it did, because initially 2 days before, I think J.D. Vance or President Trump said, this is not our concern, this is not our war, why should we? But yet 3 days later, they're all jumped into it, because they felt that obviously India had touched a raw nerve somewhere.
My name is Dr. Audumbar Bandodkar. Thanks for that very brilliant walk through the pre and post Sindoor. The last component of your heading, that is the great powers, and just because my predecessor did touch upon the involvement of America, I had basically these two questions, and they come from the fact that with whatever is happening with Pakistan, India, American positioning, Pakistan's getting stronger, and the China repositioning now in the last week, things seem to be all looking quite different. And so to say that we have almost forgotten Operation Sindoor. And it still looks that it all originated from Operation Sindoor, meaning my predecessor said about this Noor Khan base, and there is enough interviews in the international media that after the Noor Khan, which is actually said to be a nuclear facility storage in the American capture, then that, as you rightly said, then all these American big guns jumped in and then they brokered a deal. I want to know whether it is really true. That is one. Second question is that, was there a need to give any sort of flattery to Trump that there was a ceasefire because of him, and then the Indian IR between India and America could have been changed? Was it a sensible way of thinking? And the third thing is that the Western journalism projected that it is the China and Pakistan is fighting the war together against, and China is surely showed the superiority of the air power and so-called radar capturing mechanisms better than India. Can you just touch on this point?
So first, the third question about Pakistan and China. So it is true what you were saying. China was providing real-time satellite imagery and information to Pakistan. So earlier, I think in the armed forces, we were thinking of a two-front war, Pakistan and China. Today, gradually, it is a one-front that, right from Arunachal down onto Kutch, you have to treat it as one front because of the kind of technical support that China has rendered in the past, is rendering today, and will continue to render in the future, technical information. Now, about the first day that they were able to capture, and there's a lot of clarity is not there as yet, but what it is believed is that probably the Indian Air Force was not asked to target the air defense. You see, if it's an open war, this wasn't a war. In any war-like situation, the first thing that Air Force does is to take out the Army's air defense, radars. Then you establish air superiority and finally air dominance. This was not done deliberately because the target was only the camps. But what happened on the second and third day? It is the same Chinese technology, the same Chinese missiles, the same Chinese radars. They couldn't do anything. Pakistan was naked. That's why you could hit 11 air bases. Pakistan claims we actually hit 18. So the devastating damage. That's how they appealed for peace. So a lot of credit is given to China, but I think their technology and all that, India has a very good handle on it. Now, I think the things went downhill as soon as President Trump claimed credit for the ceasefire. That he has done it. India's consistent policy for the last 70 years is no mediation. We've had one bitter experience when we went to the United Nations, when we took the case of Kashmir to the United Nations. Britain and US pounced down on us and equated the invaders, Pakistan, with us who were the victims. Since then, it has been a consistent policy of all governments. No third-party mediation. We'll handle it bilaterally if we have to handle it. So no government of India can accept. And it was also not true. We didn't approach the US. It was Pakistan that went running to the US. It went running to Saudi Arabia also. That, my ba bachalo humko, talk to somebody and, get this over with. So it is possible to give President Trump benefit. He may have thought that the pressure that they applied on Pakistan to go for a ceasefire and make the phone call meant that they had mediated. But from the Indian side, there was no such request for mediation. So, some sort of flattery, as you said, or something like that. In international affairs, it is national interest. And national interest was such that you couldn't allow him any space. Pakistan, to besharam hai, it had no qualms. It's like that, इसने बचा लिया हमें, we nominated him for the Nobel Peace Prize. So their credibility and their thing, for them, it makes no difference. But India would never do that. So it has now escalated beyond Sindoor, as you rightly said. And now the question of tariffs has become the important thing. Despite the fact that the punitive tariff of 25% is so unfair, logically, because China is buying far more oil from Russia. And the US itself is importing so much more from Russia than what India is doing. And at one time, the Americans told India to buy oil from Russia so as to stabilize the oil market. And now we are being told just because your children in Ukraine are dying. So international relations is a very tricky thing. So I don't think so this could have been. If a great power's policy is dependent on the whims and fancies of one person, individual, or personal ambitions, फिर क्या बात रहेगी?
Good evening, sir. I'm Dr. Rajiv Narvekar, a professor of business management. This is regarding Balochistan. Now, one of the videos a long time back of Mr. NSA Chief Ajit Doval, I think he was addressing Shastra University, where he said that if any adventurous attempt from Pakistan, like they had done on the parliament, then they will lose Balochistan. His statement is there on record. Recently, US has labeled the freedom fighters group in Balochistan as a terrorist group. So, what is your opinion about the status of Balochistan and with this as a terror group?
You see, simple thing.
Yes.
The Baloch have been fighting since 1948. They've been fighting for their freedom since 1948. 48 से लेकर 2025 तक तो terrorists नहीं थे, है ना? Suddenly अब terrorists कैसे बन गए? They have been fighting for their freedom. I am very clear in my podcast and all that. I refer to them as freedom fighters. That they are fighting for freedom because if you go back in history, and I've said so in my podcast, Kalat, the princely state of Kalat, which Balochistan was then called, did not accept accession to Pakistan. It was forcibly, on a gunpoint, the Khan was made to sign the instrument of accession. So the Baloch have not accepted accession to Pakistan from 1948, and the first insurgency against the Pakistan state broke out in 1948 itself, showing that Baloch had not accepted merger with Pakistan. So it has been 48, there was one, 58, 62, 73 to 77, and this one began in 2004. So for the last, how much is it? 25 years, it's been continuing in one form or the other. So by declaring them as terrorists, उनको तो फर्क नहीं पड़ता. How does it matter to them? They're not traveling the world. They have access to enough weaponry. They get their money through people who are working in Oman, Baloch working in Oman, or sending their money. So it makes no difference to them. And as far as India is concerned, we don't need to take a position. We are not directly involved. We don't have a land border. We don't have to take a position. But individuals certainly can take the position whatever they think fit. So I call them freedom fighters.
Thank you, sir, for a very enlightening talk. I wanted to understand this bit about proportionality of our response. Okay, are there some international norms? What could India have done to still be within the, being called that the response was proportionate? Because we are saying that we let them go very easily. More so, when even after the ceasefire, there were drones which were Pakistani drones which were floating around in our territory. Why could we not use that window of opportunity to cause such damage that these field marshals or whatever, they could not have claimed any credit?
No, I think the proportionality was that we had identified certain targets. We, I mean the armed forces, had identified certain terrorist targets. Now these are the headquarters, Muridke or Bahawalpur, and these are the terror training camps, which are the most active terror training camps. We had identified them and taken them out effectively. And once you had done that, you were willing, even in that time on the 7th, to quell the operations then. But because Pakistan had responded, so you took it further. To escalate further meant that India on the 7th or 8th itself would have to target military targets. And that is something that India didn't want to do. It's not that the leaders have been killed, as people say, where is Hafiz Saeed or where is this chap, Masood Azhar. You see, leaders keep changing. You kill one person, somebody else will come up. But the headquarters, where all their arms, their trainees, their material, if you destroy that, that's a major damage, and the message goes across very clearly that don't indulge in these activities before. So I think we achieved what we wanted to achieve. And in a country like Pakistan, you always want to do more and hit them more to get them down on their knees. But वो कहते हैं ना ठंडा करके खाओ. So maybe Operation Sindoor 2.0 is still pending.
The new doctrine, because we said that the moment there is a terrorist attack,
Yeah.
or what we call a terrorist attack, once we are satisfied, that's an act of war.
Yeah.
In that scenario, what will be considered? Will there be a bar of proportionate response because it's a terrorist operation? Okay, and it's a war as far as they're concerned.
Yeah, so I think that has been laid down very clearly. That a war is then an all-out war. Right? A proportionate response was like under Pahalgam. But since you have laid down in your doctrine that a terror attack, now of course, you're right in asking what is considered a terror attack? 2 people being killed, is there a terror attack? How do you define the nature of the terror attack? I think we can leave that to the government and the armed forces to determine what is a terror attack.
I'm Yatin Kaporkar. 2 questions. After Operation Sindoor, the ties between Pakistan and America have improved and become better. and General Asim Munir is having good relations with President Donald Trump. How does that affect India, this improved ties of Pakistan and America? And second is, how different is Asim Munir and how dangerous is he compared to the earlier Pakistani generals?
Okay, so let me tell you about Asim Munir. He is an extremely calculating person, much more so than any army chiefs in the past. And I'll give you a particular example. He was promoted to 3-star in 2018. And a 3-star's tenure is 4 years. He was promoted in September. All the other people who were promoted with him picked up their ranks in September 2018. This man disappeared for 2 months. Nobody knows where he went on medical treatment or what happened. At least I'm not aware of where he went. He returned and picked up his rank on 22nd November 2018. At 3-star level or any level, you join immediately because it's a promotion. This chap skipped for 2 months. You know why? He knew then he will now retire in November 2022. Right? By that time, his cohort would have retired. He became the senior most person to be considered for army chief. So he had calculated in 2018 that he will be in contention for army chief, and the government picked him because of the bad relations he had with Imran Khan. And they gave him a 2-day extension. And when Bajwa, the former army chief, retired, he was made army chief. So extremely calculating person. He's planned his moves, and he's planned his further moves too. We don't have time, but he's even now looking to become president of Pakistan. And his extension, as I mentioned, is due now in November. He is now going to get a 2-year extension first, because the 26th Amendment allows the army chief 3 or 5-year tenure. But he is trying to project that 5 years will begin from 2025. So he goes up to 2030. He's here for a very long time. And then he is a Hafizul Quran. It's a good thing. But he brings to the table much more than what Ziaul Haq brought to the table. In every speech, every time he talks about, he is dropping hadith, the sayings from the Quran, just trying to show what a great scholar or whatever he is. It's a very calculating man. He's going to be here for a long time, and you're going to hear a lot more about him. Yeah, that's the other thing. So I must tell you this story is a favorite story of mine. How Ayub Khan became Field Marshal. There was a ceremonial parade of the Punjab Regiment, and the Colonel Commandant of the Punjab Regiment was Field Marshal Auchin Lake, who was the Supreme Commander of India and Pakistan after the 1947. So he was leading the parade and he saluted with his baton. And Ayub Khan was on the dais and he had to return the salute with a hand salute. For some reason, he took offense. I had to salute with my hand, and this chap saluted with the baton. Immediately after the parade, Ayub Khan's ADC went to the Auchin Lake and said, "Can I borrow your baton for some time?" So he borrowed the baton, copied it. Of course, the baton was returned. But by the time Auchin Lake had gone back to London, this chap declared himself Field Marshal. And Auchin Lake was very upset, and he told Iskandar Mirza, who was in London, I became a Field Marshal because of the wars I won, battles I won against Germany in Europe and against the Japanese in the Far East. What battle has Ayub Khan won to declare himself Field Marshal? Now, if he were to ask that question to Asim Munir, Ayub Khan at least didn't suffer a defeat. This man actually was defeated, in Operation Sindoor. And yet, he gets a 5th star. So that's Field Marshal. And of course, as Admiral mentioned, Field Marshals never retire. But whether he continues to be Army Chief as Field Marshal, or will the 26th Amendment Army Act take in? That's a matter for debate. Now, the first question of yours was on Pakistan-US and Asim Munir's close relationship with the US. You see, much is made of Asim Munir being invited to the White House for lunch. The visuals of that were very dismal for Asim Munir, because he had to walk. His limousine didn't come up to the porch. He was dropped short of it and he had to walk. And there are visuals of that, you can see how flustered he is. His previous generals like Ayub Khan, Zia and Musharraf, the limousines had gone into the porch because they were also heads of states. This time was neither head of state nor government. So he probably decided at that time, okay, next time I come here, I'll come as head of state. Therefore, his ambitions is now to become, as I mentioned, the US the President of Pakistan. So, President Trump is probably just using him to poke India in the eye. For example, he claimed that we are going to look at oil reserves in Pakistan. There are no oil reserves. People of Pakistan, the joke was, we've got oil, because people know it's a joke. Similarly, on these critical minerals, if they were critical minerals, you think the Chinese would be sitting quiet. Chinese have been in Pakistan for the last 20 years. And building roads, building power plants. The only one mine which is there is Reko-Dek. Reko-Dek was discovered in 1993. We are in 2025. No commercial mining has even begun. Saudis want to play, somebody else wants to come, then they're going away. There's a lot of chaos. There's no substantive geological survey which has said that there is critical minerals in Pakistan. And Pakistan claims we are sitting on $7 trillion worth of minerals. They could have said 5, they could have said 8, they could have said 10. जब है ही नहीं तो कुछ भी बोलो. So, because they realize that President Trump needs their support to spite India, therefore this whole relationship is developing on those lines. They're going to fall flat. Yes, if the US goes after Iran in a serious way, and they put boots on the ground, and they require rehabilitation and rescue missions, hospitalization, secret air bases to fly drones and fly aircraft, then Pakistan's importance becomes, revives. But till such that time, right now it's a very dicey situation. So.
Thank you for that talk. We enjoyed it thoroughly. I have a comment and a question. The comment is that, as you said in your talk, apart from the kinetic action that took place, it was also a war of narratives. So in the narratives, the Pakistanis firmly believe that they won, and we also believe that we won the conflict. So in that context, I think this, even if we accept your statement that number of aircraft shot down is not really important, if it's so inconsequential, then why not say that, all right, we lost some aircraft, and the Chief of Defence Staff said so in Singapore of all the places to a foreign. So I think we messed up our narrative a little bit. In 71, we know the Indian Air Force admitted that we lost 75 or 76 aircraft versus 50 of the PAF, because the Indian Air Force went further, went day and night, where the Pakis tried to conserve. So I think that was a misstep. And it was compounded by the Chief of Air Staff 3 months after the event, saying that we actually shot down or destroyed so many Pak aircraft. So had this been handled a little better, I think it would have come across for the people. And since you are an influencer, I think this needs to be pointed out to everybody. My question is a larger one. Given your huge insights into Pakistan, we know that all the trouble is created by the deep state, which is the intelligence agency plus GHQ. The deep state creates the problem. I want to ask you that, should we not draw a distinction between the deep state and the people of Pakistan? Should we not have a strategy where we target the deep state, but we try and influence the people of Pakistan? Because if you look at the Cold War, the West drew a distinction between the Soviet regime and the people of Russia. And they mounted huge propaganda, Radio Free Europe, propaganda, etc., because to keep the Russian people on their side and bring about the downfall of the Soviet regime. So should we not evolve a strategy where we target the deep state and the government, but
try and influence the people of Pakistan so that, I mean, thing like Indus water, if you deprive the farmers of water, I mean, are we achieving anything? What is your view on this topic?
So, first thing on the narratives. India's strategic communication, and I say this without any fear of contradiction, is poor. Our strategic communication, we still live in the mentality that the media is a dur raho, especially in the government. It's a double-edged thing. You can lose your job, so just stay away from the media. So we are getting there slowly. Kargil was one example where media handling was excellent, was outstanding. But possibly we haven't built on that. So our strategy, we are always reactive. And the attitude of the armed forces is, you're fighting a war. You have no time to deal with the media, which is wrong. You know, you have to fight in any event, any engagement. There is a kinetic, there is a diplomatic, and there has to be narrative war. You have to fight on all three fronts. You can't say, "I'm narrative nahi karenge," because we are fighting a hot war. So I agree with you that our strategic communication needs a lot of improvement. And I think after this, if the government really takes a lesson, that Pakistan ran away with the narrative on the first day itself. The West lapped it up because they were anti-India anyway. So that was one. Now, to make a distinction between the deep state and the people of Pakistan is extremely difficult because the people of Pakistan don't really matter. In some sense, it is the establishment of the deep state which calls all the shots, and everybody wants to be a part of that. There is nobody standing up against the deep state. Anybody who did is no longer existing. Whether it was Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, Benazir, Shahbaz Sharif has been out of power. Look at where Imran Khan is languishing. So the people of Pakistan, to mobilize them against the deep state is very difficult. And one of the problems is that about 70% of the army is recruited from Punjab or one or two districts of the frontier. And that is the major population center. If you have to achieve anything in Pakistan by people's protest or people's movement, it is the same people whose sons and brothers are already in the army. So how do you tackle that?
Commander's house was
And he himself was welcoming them. He was welcoming them and talking to them as if कुछ हो ही नहीं रहा, उसका घर जल रहा है. And so I think it's very difficult for India to try and do this kind of a thing. Sorry.
Good evening. I'm Toral Gosalia. Thank you so much for this information. My question to you is, why is IMF funding Pakistan? And it happened just after the Operation Sindoor. Is it something which is pre-planned to reduce the speed of India's growth? Or what is the narrative behind that IMF keeps funding Pakistan? Thank you.
Good question. You see, this is the 23rd or 24th bailout that the IMF has given. Now, at one level, the IMF has to recover its money. The previous loans that have been given, it has to recover its money. So unless it does not give another loan to Pakistan to keep it afloat, तो जितने पुराने पैसे दिए गए हैं वो तो सब डूब जाएंगे. So after a while, a creditor and the debtor come to a very funny situation where the creditor becomes dependent on the debtor to repay the loan. So one part of this is that. Second part, nobody wants Pakistan to fail. A country of 240 million people with nuclear weapons, with the kind of radicalization that is there, nobody wants it to fail. So this IMF loan is just like being on a ventilator. It is not going to structurally alter Pakistan's economy. There is no leadership in Pakistan to do it, and this money is not adequate. They release 1.5 billion per year. It's not adequate to structurally change Pakistan's economy. So that's why the IMF loan gives. It is not anything to do with India.
Hello, sir. My name is Shubham Bhatt. I'm a student of School of International and Area Studies. So my question was, the most part of the operation was conducted through beyond visual range platforms. Like the planes were within Indian territory when the missiles were fired. So is this something unique to Op Sindoor, or is this the future of all the warfare in the future? And my second question was, we being a coastal state, Goa, all three forces are very dear to us, but we host naval aviation base. So through that angle, what are some lesser known roles played by the Indian Navy in Op Sindoor? Thank you, sir.
You see, I'm not a military man, so I can't tell you the future of warfare. But I think this is certainly the way. Whether it is drones or BVRs, it is within the safety of your own borders. I think this will be the future, but probably a military man will be able to answer this in a much better manner. Now, I think the Indian Navy, and you have Admiral sitting over here, you can talk to him. But the Navy was ready, prepared for action, and I think the Prime Minister also said this in Parliament. कि Navy के तो मुंह से roti निकाली. That the Navy was itching. I think one day more, and Karachi would have been absolutely in smithereens. Yeah. So I think the Navy had a very strong and a very important role in keeping the Pakistan Navy and any relief vessels from reaching Pakistan. So it was not a formal blockade, but I think no ship dare venture in the presence of the Indian Navy.
Good evening, sir.
So you have another naval officer you can ask him.
Good evening, sir. I'm Commodore Nair, retired from the Indian Navy. My question basically revolves around if we just gaze a little bit into the future, say D+6 from now on, 6 months to 1 year. We are very sure that Op Sindoor 2.0 is on. Before India attacks Pakistan, will Iran attack Pakistan is the question, sir. Considering the entire geopolitical scenario in which everybody is, because there are some comments floating around on the internet that even before India will attack this thing, Iran may be the first guy to thram this guy, so that basically to prevent him from giving bases to the US and other things. So what's your view on this, sir?
You see, that will be I think a huge nail in Pakistan's coffin. 20 to 25% of Pakistan's population is Shia, right? And if it comes to be known that Pakistan is allowing US bases inside its territory to attack Iran, there will be a violent eruption in Pakistan itself. And the Shia population, though it's spread all over Pakistan, is in pockets, in Karachi, in Quetta, in Jhang in Punjab, in Gilgit-Baltistan. So there will be a civil war-like situation because the Shias will not accept this. And to prevent the killing of the Shias in Pakistan, a scenario could come that Iran will, I won't say launch a direct attack, but certainly using missiles and using proxies will do something. So it will be a huge mistake on Pakistan's part. It will be a real strategic mistake. It could be the black swan event, which will ultimately lead to a lot of chaos in Pakistan. So you're right that Iran can play a critical role were Pakistan to be foolish enough to allow the US space in Pakistan to attack Iran.
Good evening, sir. My question is about finding a permanent solution to this recurring nightmare which has been plaguing our country for 80 years now. We are finally dealing with a nuclear state. So even if we play like pawns and horses and whatever, rooks and all that, eventually it's going to lead to something which is not good for anybody. So is there a peaceful solution to these issues? Like, for example, Afghanistan was in such bad shape for so many decades, and now it seems to be, slightly better. Nobody spoke about it, but is there a possibility that instead of fighting this from Arunachal to Kutch, and as we are growing as a superpower, we need to keep up with this, radical, backward, a place which probably doesn't have a plan for the future, and is probably going to want to take us down for stupid reasons or logics of their own.
In an ideal world, not in a practical world. You see, which state, basically if you look at whatever disputes there are, they're territorial. Now two farmers fighting with each other will kill each other rather than give up land. Can you imagine two countries? If China claims Arunachal Pradesh as part of their territory, are you going to sit back and say, for the sake of peace, to take over the land? Similarly, in the case of Pakistan, they think the whole of Kashmir, because they are Muslim, should come to it, even though they know the Maharaja signed the instrument of acceding to India. Yet, because its nationalism is religious, it feels that Kashmir should be part of it. So, in an ideal world, yes, there is no peaceful solution to it, unless Pakistan and China have a total, brain fade and, come to a different. It's not possible.
Yeah, good evening, sir. I am Charu Limaye. Just wanted to know, what exactly Trump and America wants to do, because America is also one of the country which has suffered a lot in the early 2000 due to the terrorist attacks, and now they are supporting the terrorist country, and what kind of action we are taking? We go to UN and talk about Pakistan as a terrorist country, but America being a superpower, can they just just away like that, and no action can be taken against them? And that means what is your opinion about it? And one more question is, what we see in the YouTube that in Pakistan there is so much of inflation, the cost of living is so high. I mean, even the eggs, the atta and all so costly over there. How still, they are still, we feel that it is so costly, means the inflation is going high. With 260 rupees per dozen, egg per dozen, plus about 160 rupees atta and all, how they are still surviving, how the people are still surviving there.
Yeah. So, to talk about your second part of your question, in Pakistan, historically, for the last 70 years, there have been three agitations, but none of them on economic issues. There was an agitation against Ayub Khan, student agitation, he had to quit. There was an agitation against Zia, movement for restoration of democracy. And then there was a lawyers' agitation when Musharraf sacked the Chief Justice. But on economic issues, when you mentioned the high cost of living, inflation, so today the situation is that a person say either I educate my children or I pay the electricity bill. The prices have become so high in terms of inflation, as you mentioned some of them. But people have never protested on economic issues. So this is a fertile field for study. Somebody can study this. But I think that one of the reasons is that they have a very strong Biradari network. So, for example, in the villages, in the rural areas, where a landlord has large number of people working, he looks after their needs. In the urban areas, every house, big house in Lahore or thing, has 10 or 12 servants. And the person looks after their needs. So because of this informal, not registered support systems, the people are able to get 2 square meals a day. And they survive and they will not agitate. That's what's happening. On the other issue about terrorism, you see, the problem with the international system is that the definition of terrorism has not been defined in the UN. For the last 30 years, attempts are being made to define what is the terrorism, or what is a terrorist. There is no definition. So because there is no definition, it's easy for countries who are sponsoring the terror are able to get around it. And the US, these are the great powers of the biggest hypocrites. Whenever it comes to their national interest, they will find some loophole or the other. And the best loophole is that we cannot let Pakistan sink because it's got 240 million people, 5th or the 8th largest army, nuclear weapons. So no. We cannot do this. We'll talk to them. They have to improve. They have to get rid of their terrorists. But the fact of the matter is that terrorism is incubating in Pakistan. Everybody knows. There's documented proof by Pakistanis' own sources that this is actually what is happening in Pakistan. Despite that, it continues.
Even Osama bin Laden also was found get killed in Pakistan.
Yeah.
But still US is supporting Pakistan.
Okay, we'll take two more questions, and we have to give our speaker a break.
Yeah, good evening, sir. So this is Prachi. I met you again, and thank you so much for such a wonderful session today. Well, I have quite a few questions, but the first one being is, we are dealing with enemies on the west of our borders. What about east? Much of our eastern borders don't normally go into a public discussion as much as we are discussing Operation Sindoor. Another thing is, with the recent, rise in the radicalization in the whole of Pakistan, what is the public sentiment of it? How are the public reacting to it?
Public where?
In Pakistan, the public narrative of the recent radicalization or the extreme radicalization over there. And another thing is, besides that, what is the public narrative? The public narrative as in not what the major Pakistani people are saying, but the public narrative of the civilians, the Pakistani civilians about India. Are they like, har Bharatiya hamara dushman hai, or are there mixed emotions, are there mixed narratives or mixed opinions about us?
No, good question. I think the East somehow has been neglected. I think people in Delhi lose interest as soon as you cross Siliguri. That used to be the old joke. But whether it is Bangladesh, whether it is Myanmar, these are very, very vital and critical neighbors of ours. And we certainly need to pay far more attention than, but Pakistan, because of the issue of terrorism, has captured the imagination far more. And I think the scars of partition to many extent continues. So therefore Pakistan gets far more attention. But you're right, Bangladesh and Myanmar need a lot more attention than what is being given at the moment.
So one more. It's like Bangladesh, Myanmar. What about China?
Yeah, so that's the northern neighbor, not the eastern. China you can't help but pay attention to. And a lot of attention in India does get paid to China. There are more think tanks on China in India than there are think tanks on Pakistan. In fact, there is no think tank on Pakistan. As I mentioned yesterday, in your university, there are no think tanks on Pakistan in India. They're all part of some tucked into area studies or something or the other. But China has dedicated think tanks. So there's a lot of attention on China. But Myanmar and Bangladesh certainly much more. Then about people's sentiment during Operation Sindoor. Initially there was a lot of euphoria. They were told that they had won the war. And naturally, you have a nationalistic feeling. But now that that sentiment is sort of petered off, flattened out, and the reality is coming out, that actually it was Pakistan that had to go and appeal for a ceasefire, and what the losses were, and with the satellite imagery which is coming out, people are beginning to see the reality and realizing that they were badly smashed. So then the reverse, is coming, that they have realized that what had actually happened. And the other one you asked me, people?
Like with the recent radicalization, like radical groups are there, but there are people who are not part of those also. What is their perspective?
The silent majority doesn't come out of the streets. It's the radical elements that will come out and raise slogans like Hindustan ka jo yaar hai, gaddar hai, gaddar hai. So, they're the ones who dominate the narrative because they dominate the street. And because they dominate the street, just the people just back off and rather not get involved.
I think, please take away the mics. Thank you all for coming to today's public lecture, and I think nobody really left, so that gives an idea about how interested everyone was. And thank you, Tilak ji, and thank you. We have the President of the International Center Goa, Mr. Kakotkar, retired Admiral Arun Prakash. Thank you all for coming, and we'll see you maybe in a month or so. Let me see who comes next. We have a couple of names lined up, but see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.